Good evening. I'm excited to be here. Glad that I got the invite, and hopefully you'll be glad that I got the invite too by the time we're done. If not, I can handle tough things. Just tell me. I feel privileged that I get to speak about the topic that we have tonight. Mickey said, well, you got the easiest night. So that was a little bit more added pressure that I didn't really need. But the trouble I found was there's just so much that we can talk about. And trying to condense it down into 45 minutes may be difficult, but I'll try my best to do it. What a wonderful video to kind of get our thoughts started. And I think we can take that and carry it on. One thing I was surprised about, Numbers 13 and 14 is where we're going to be focusing tonight. Just in case it's somebody else's first night here, we're going to be studying tonight about the 12 spies, spies that were sent out to observe the promised land, come back with a report. We're going to hopefully glean some wisdom from this story that will apply to us today. But I was really surprised just how often we can read about this throughout the Bible. I guess I never had dove into all the cross references and tracked everything down, but there's so much in the Bible that speaks about Numbers 13 and 14. We can go to Deuteronomy, we can go to Psalms, we can go to Joshua. We can spend a significant amount of time in Hebrews. And all wonderful lessons for us that the Bible does such a good job kind of breaking it down for us to where we really don't have to look for anything outside of the good book. Hebrews 3 and 4 and 1 Corinthians 10 are a couple passages of the New Testament that help us understand a little bit more about what was going on in the wilderness and some of the attitudes, some of the difficult things that they found themselves challenged with, and we'll dive into all of that as we go. I'm going to try to hurry through what feels a little bit more like a lecture part of tonight, and then I'd like to get into some discussion stuff. So bear with me during the part that may feel more like you're being talked to instead of conversed with. Starting there in Numbers 13, looking at the first 24 verses. Some of the main things we see is God telling Moses to send 12 men to spy out Canaan. And we see that number a lot, 12. Here it's one from each tribe, one leader chosen from each tribe to be a spy. The spies confirm the land is exactly what God promised. Shocker. Exactly what God promised. God had been making this wonderful promise. He had been preparing them for it. The land was exactly as He promised. I used a word just a few moments ago that was on purpose. These spies were sent out to observe. In the English Standard Version and some others, that word is spy out. That's how it's translated. NIV, it's translated observe. King James Version, search. We see all of those. But they were sent out to observe, not to determine whether God could fulfill His promise. Those are two very different things. Sent out to spy, sent out to observe. Now, we all make plans. And, there's lots of wonderful sayings about plans. Sometimes things don't go how we plan. We try to do research. We try to be prepared. Try to be educated in our decision making and our planning on those things. But here, really, this was just the Lord saying, okay, you can go observe. There was really no need for it. God had already promised Abraham in Genesis 12 through 1, or 12, 1 through 7, God first promised it to Abraham. Verse 7 specifically, to your offspring I will give this land. In Genesis 15, and I'm going to go through these quick. If anybody wants copies of this, I'll provide it. But in Genesis 15, 18 through 21, God specifies the boundaries of the promised land. Some pretty specific details about what was being promised here. In verse 18, to your offspring I give this land. We see that same language. We know from other passages this promise was made to Isaac, made to Jacob. We know it was made to Moses, Exodus 3, 7, and 8, a language that we oftentimes use when we're referring to this, a land flowing with milk and honey. It paints a beautiful picture of just how much this land had to provide. In Exodus 33, 1 through 3, God again promises to drive out the inhabitants. It's important to remember, since that seemed to be a pretty big stumbling block for them. God also made the promise through Moses to Israel. Exodus 6, 6 through 8. In verse 8 specifically, I will bring you into the land that I swore to give Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. God has declared this will be their land. He's going to drive out the obstacles that are currently inhabiting it, and He's going to provide all these wonderful gifts. They're going to have access to all this stuff, just like the video showed, the amazing fruit, so much more that this land had to provide than what they had experienced while traveling through the wilderness. A key point that we're going to keep coming back to is the issue was never whether God could do it. That was never the issue. Jumping forward in verses 25 through 33 of Numbers 13, we see the spies coming into play. What's interesting is the 10 spies all said they admitted that the land was excellent, but they focused on the obstacles. They discouraged the people. And Caleb, on the other hand, encourages immediate obedience. We're going to talk more about this too as we go on, and I know because there are so many people that attend here that are a member of the team at Team Modern that there's probably been lots of lessons about optimistic energy. You all probably know that's one of our core values, just like our employees do. But man, that came into my mind a lot during this lesson. Caleb, such the optimist. But it wasn't anything within himself. He was optimistic about what God had promised and that he had the ability to do what He promised. He believed God would give them the victory. And what an amazing example of faith he is. The Bible highlights that repeatedly. In Numbers 14:24, he had another spirit with him and hath followed me fully. Joshua 14:6 through 14, Caleb tells why he did it. We're going to dive into that more. If I keep saying we're going to dive into more, I don't know how long we're going to be here, but we will get back to some of this stuff. But in Joshua 14, Caleb tells kind of what was going through his mind. And in Joshua 15, 13 through 19, in Caleb's old age, we see that he drove out the descendants of Anak. He drove out the giants in his old age, about 85 years old. What an amazing example of faith Caleb had. Faith says, let us go up at once. That's what Caleb said. And fear says, we are not able to do this. And those are the two options that were on the table for them to take. But faith, it looks beyond the circumstances. I wasn't smart enough to say this, but I thought this was simple and clever. The giants were real, the fortified cities were real, but God was greater. God's greater than all those things. He's greater than all the obstacles. Ephesians 3:20, now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask for or think. Our goal is always, when we're studying these things, to make application for ourselves, right? We're studying something that happened under the old law, something that happened in a different time. What does it have to do with us today and how we live as we put on our faith in Christ today? What does it teach us? How can we learn from it? It's the same God we serve today that they were serving. I think it's beautiful in Ephesians 3:20, just how much more abundantly He can take care of us than perhaps we can even think or imagine. I mentioned just how much Hebrews chapter 3 and 4 are they're a commentary of this story in the Old Testament. Their unbelief prevented them from entering God's rest. Let's turn to Hebrews chapter 3. Listen to 16 through 19. Read along with me. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that he would not enter his rest, or they would not enter his rest? But to those who were disobedient? So we see that we were unable to enter because of unbelief. It wasn't because the enemy was so powerful, the terrain was so difficult, the walls were so tall. It was because of unbelief. I said just a few moments ago mentioned Caleb's wonderful example of faith. And anytime faith comes up in conversation, we think about that biblical definition of it that we can find there in Hebrews 11:1. Won't even ask you, just what is it? How do we define faith by the biblical definition? Faith is... Thank you. Caleb had not seen the promise fulfilled, but he knew it would be. He hadn't seen it. It hadn't come to fruition. But he was ready. Let's go up and take it now. No hesitation. In 2 Corinthians 5:7, we're instructed to walk by faith, not by sight. If God says we're able to do something, then we are able. And it's easy for us to look back at this story and just look down on them for the doubt that they had. But we're going to make some application tonight for us today. What kind of things do we convince ourselves we're not able to do? What are the things that we convince ourselves are too difficult? Moving on through the story, though, Numbers 14, 1 through 10. The people. There was weeping and complaining. Wish they had died. Desire to return to Egypt. Made plans to stone Joshua and Caleb. Imagine seeing the fruit that was brought back. Imagine hearing the optimistic energy that Caleb was bringing with his report. And so turned off by that because of the negativity from the other 10 that you're planning to stone Joshua and Caleb. I mean, there are some early mornings I do not appreciate somebody's optimistic tone. But going to the point of planning to stone them, casting them out, doing these terrible things. And Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes. They were begging, pleading with the people, don't harden your heart. Don't go down this path. And they were declaring God is able to do anything. He can do this. He's promised it. He will do it. There in Numbers 14, I need to get back to that area myself here. I'm still in the New Testament. Numbers 14, verse 9. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Notice that refusing to trust God is described as rebellion. Now, just talking about how we're going to make some application for us today. Are there ever moments where you don't trust in what you know God is bringing to the table? It's described as rebellion, not just fear, but rebellion. Unbelief here, it's sinful. Numbers presents unbelief not as intellectual doubt, but as refusing to trust God's revealed word. Seems to take some of the pressure off when we just look at it as fear. Something's scaring us. Something seems a little daunting. Paints a different picture when we call it what it is, rebellion and sin. Hebrews 3:12, take care, brothers, lest there be any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. Once again, Hebrews 3 and 4 are commentaries on this story. These people had developed an evil, unbelieving heart that led them astray from the living God. In Hebrews 3, the same warning is being given to us. In verse 9, do not harden your hearts as in the day of the rebellion. In verse 12, guard against your own unbelieving heart. It's a problem. It wouldn't have appeared so much. It wouldn't be in the Word of God for us to consume if He didn't think it was going to be a problem for us, just like it was for them. Some more passages to jot down, to perhaps look at in a little bit more depth if you're taking notes. Psalm 78, 17 through 22. There in verse 18 it says, tested God in their heart. You don't have to say or do anything on the outside. It can go completely unnoticed, unseen by others. But we can be testing God in our heart. We got to go back and make sure that we're not hardening our hearts and allowing that to happen. In verse 22, because they did not believe in God. That was the problem here. I think they probably believed that God existed. They had seen examples. They had witnessed miraculous things. But in their heart, they did not believe in God. Also in Psalm 106, 24 through 27. In verse 24, they despised the pleasant land, having no faith in the promise. Some harsh language, having no faith in a promise that God made. The one that had delivered them out of Egypt and out of so many other problems. In 25, they murmured in their tents. I like how the little video that we just watched said the people are whispering again. They're murmuring. Did not obey the voice of the Lord. You know, Israel was also pretty fearful at the Red Sea. In verse 11 of Exodus 14? Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die? They were fearful. They were concerned. The same kind of attitude, same unbelief has crept back in. Moses later recounts this event in Deuteronomy 1, 19 through 33. He thought the request that God made, or he thought that the request was a good one. Yeah, what's wrong with sending out spies to observe? Verse 20 of Deuteronomy 1, go and spy that out which the Lord our God is giving us. I like that language there. Already accepted by Moses. He's giving it to us. Even his language, his tone, presented to the people his belief and his faith. Much different from what their tone was afterwards. In spite of all the Lord had done for them, in verse 33, you did not believe the Lord your God. That moves us into Numbers 14, 11 through 38, on God's judgment. An interesting part of the story. God's had enough. I'm going to strike them with pestilence and disinherit them. Brings up that Israel has tested them 10 times. It says this generation will not enter Canaan. Caleb and Joshua alone will enter. And there's going to be 40 years of wandering. And Moses, as he had previously, goes to intercede. He tries appealing to God's reputation and his mercy, God's own character. He threw out all the tricks. In Numbers 14, 18, the Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy. Just in case the Lord had forgotten those things, Moses decides to try to remind them. This verse echoes God's own description of himself in Exodus 34, 6 and 7. He chose those words very wisely. In Psalm 103, we see talk of God's mercy and justice. A book I hadn't mentioned yet that refers to this story, Nehemiah 9, 16 through 23, reviews the rebellion during a confession of sin, the people confessing the sin at this time, how their ancestors had behaved. We see warnings based on this event in Psalm 95. People that go astray in their heart and they have not known my ways, they shall not enter my rest. Psalm 99, verse 8, you were a forgiving God to them, but an avenger of their wrongdoings. And then all throughout Hebrews 3 and 4. A major lesson for us as believers. God is a disciplinarian. God is unchanging. But we tend to forget about the discipline. In Hebrews 3:19, picking back up, they're unable to enter because of their unbelief. Hebrews 4:11, let us therefore strive to enter that rest so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. Calling it what it is, disobedience. Now God forgave Israel, but they still got disciplined. Forgiveness and discipline can both exist. Both can be true. Today, he loves us and he'll forgive us. He will also discipline us. Looks a little different today. Turn back to Hebrews chapter 12. I'm almost ready to start pulling you all in. Verse 5, and you have forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the ones he loves, and he chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons, for what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. I like to think the words were carefully chosen there in Hebrews 12:11. For the moment of discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. When they were looking in, when they sent these spies to observe, they saw unbelievable fruit. Fruit you couldn't hardly even imagine existed. Just the size of it. How two of them, it would take two of them to carry it. We've got to be willing to accept the discipline, learn from the discipline, grow from it. Do not grow weary during it. One last part before we get into a little bit more conversation. After all of this, Numbers 14:39 through 45. After refusing to obey, Israel suddenly decides it's time to fight. We're going to fight anyway. Moses warned them, God's no longer with you all. You're going to lose. In verse 40 through 43. But they go anyway, and guess what? They got defeated in verse 45. When I was studying this, it just painted this picture of it was a real pull ourselves up by our bootstraps kind of attitude. Maybe that makes this a little bit more personal. You ever think, I've got this. I can get myself out of this. I can turn this around. For whatever reason, we think trying harder is the solution. For some reason, at an early age, Michael also has this problem. We chose to like golf. And I'm telling you, the harder you try, the worse off you are when you're trying to hit that little ball. We seem to do the same thing when we find ourselves in moments of unbelief or in moments of sin, trying to get ourselves out of it, when the only way out's God. The only way out is through his promise. The only way out is through his wisdom and his instruction and allowing him to consume our hearts. Man, we think we're smarter sometimes. So before we give them too much grief over this decision to go ahead and fight, perhaps we need to remind ourselves of those moments when we think we can get ourselves out of something too. If you're taking notes, Deuteronomy 1:41 through 46, Moses retells of the defeat there. It's a little different perspective than where we see it in others. Proverbs 3:5 through 6, we're instructed there to trust the Lord rather than your own judgment. I think that speaks loudly of what we're trying to make sure we all understand here. James 4:13 through 17. It says, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town. You recognize that? We're going to trade, we're going to prosper. But, in fact, we are a mist that appears for just a little time and then vanishes. We should be thinking about if the Lord wills when we say we're going to do something. They should have paused. If the Lord wills, will you reconsider this if we now go to fight? Maybe there would have been a different outcome. So I think we have some major takeaways. I'll try to use the rest of the time to speak to that. The first one is faith is choosing to believe what God has said. What did all 12 spies see during their observation? This is the participation part of class. Very prosperous. Giants. Big grapes. Walls. So they all saw those things. Yeah. They saw giants. They saw fortified cities, fruitful land. The difference wasn't the evidence. It wasn't what they saw. It was how it was interpreted. Those 10 spies concluded God's promises, or God's promise can't overcome these obstacles. Once again, we look down on them. How could they say that God isn't strong enough, isn't mighty enough to fulfill His promise? But how often do we make decisions that would imply that we are thinking the same way?
Faith is not strong.
Exactly. Moments of weakness. Our faith can get in our way too because we have not built it up as we need to. Joshua and Caleb, because God promised it, the obstacles don't change the outcome. That was their attitude. Whatever on the other side of these walls, however big the men are that are guarding it, none of those obstacles are going to change the promise. I love that Caleb said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it." Oftentimes at work I talk about, I'd like to see a sense of urgency. Just a little urgency on some things. Caleb was ready. His faith was so strong. He's ready to take it on. Romans 4, we see there in 13 and 18 through 21, somebody else's faith that was really strong. Abraham, in his efforts to see the promise come to be that he would have been made, he was old. Sarah was barren. But the promise was realized through their faith because God is greater. He's greater than those obstacles. In that situation, He was greater than the fact that they were very old. He was greater than the fact that Sarah was barren. Fully convinced that God was able to do what He had promised. We mentioned it earlier. Anybody, can you recall what 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7 say? Walk by, not by sight. They saw some concerning things. I don't think that I want to go hand-to-hand combat with people that might have stood 9.5 feet. I don't think I would be really excited about it. We're trying to climb over those very high walls. But by faith, not by sight. That's the goal. Our obstacles that we have today are big to us. Christians experience financial uncertainty, health problems, family struggles. a different kind of persecution, unanswered questions. The question becomes, will I trust God even when I don't understand? And that's when we struggle. Makes me think of the story there in Mark 9, 23 through 25. I believe, help my unbelief. I think everybody here tonight believes in the Lord. They believe in His power and in His might. But there will be moments when a little unbelief rears its head. And what are we going to do in those situations? Isaiah 41:10, I am your God, I will strengthen you, I will help you. Philippians 4, 6, and 7, do not be anxious about anything. Hebrews 3:12, protect yourself against an unbelieving heart. They're not just words on a page. They're things that we should be listening to, things that we should be reminding ourselves of, things that we should be singing songs about throughout our day. And on top of that, Israel had seemed to have forgotten all the previous things that God had done. They forgot the plagues, forgot the Passover, forgot the Red Sea. They forgot the manna, forgot the water from the rock. They forgot God's visible presence that had been traveling with them. Instead of focusing on the current problem, this is for us, instead of focusing on whatever the current problem is, what if we focus on those things that God has seen us through, on those blessings we have witnessed? We're able to remind ourselves of those things. It's a little bit easier to get in the right frame of mind to tackle the obstacle. David did that before facing Goliath. In 1 Samuel 17:37, the Lord who delivered me from the lion and the bear. He's reminding himself. Ten leaders agreed, only 2 trusted God. Truth wasn't determined by a vote. Oftentimes culture says majority rules. Now we got to believe that. We got to follow that. We got to be careful. I'm going to have to skip some of this stuff. And that's unfortunate. But I want to wrap up with the last few minutes that we've got, hoping that everybody understands how we are being attacked with our own unbelief and with the obstacles that we come into contact with throughout our daily lives. The practical things to walk away with from this is today, if you hear His voice, which we do when we open the Word, Hebrews 3, 7 through 15, do not harden your hearts. Don't be like Israel. We got to respond. 5 shortened down points here that all fall under this. The greatest obstacle to God's people was never the giants in Canaan. That was never the biggest obstacle. It was the unbelief. So, if we want to reduce Numbers 13 through 14 down to those few practical things, trust God's promises more than your circumstances. Do not let the circumstances of the day, of the moment, dictate your faith. Trust God's promises. Remember God's past faithfulness. We just spoke about that one. And this one, I don't know that I can't say it with enough emotion in my voice. Understand negativity is a cancer. The majority was very, very negative. 10 out of the 12 spies. And that spread like a fire throughout the camp, demolishing the faith of the whole group. We all have moments where we can get a little negative about something. But if you can't find yourself being positive about the majority of the things, it's going to be difficult. It's an uphill battle. Persevere in faith like Caleb did. Approximately 45 years. 40 to 45 years. 85 years old before he saw this promise come to be. And lastly, keep the noise of the world out so you can hear the Lord. It's tough. Unfortunately, between this and my laptop and my phone, all of the ways that people can put a little extra noise into my life. Called doom scrolling for a reason. There are people, their whole goal is to spread false things and for you to read it and get worked up about it. The whole goal is to say something that gets you all tore up, that maybe affects your faith, affects your gratitude, affects your love. Keep the noise of the world out. The noise was so loud in that camp of how big the people were and how fortified the cities were that they could not see all the good. I assure you, we can stumble into the same thing today. There's still a lot of good in this world. There's still a lot of good in this room. We have a wonderful support group. I'm confident I could call anybody here and they'd be willing to listen in a moment of struggle. And I hope that you could do the same with me. God's made a wonderful promise to us. Don't let us get so close to the finish line that we take our eye off the prize because of the noise of the world, because of the fears and the unbelief. Well, let's take it across the finish line and help each other along the way. Because I took too long in the first part, I did not get to pull you all in as much as I hoped to, so I apologize. But I do thank you for your attention. Once again, thank the elders for allowing me to be here tonight. What a wonderful story. What a wonderful lesson that we can go back to. And even though it's frustrating that it took many, many people out into the wilderness that didn't get to see this promise come to fruition, the promise did come to fruition. Let us be patient as we wait on ours. Thank you all.